A famous Christian writer once said, "What comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us." As Christians, it's important that our view of God reflects the God of the Bible, and not some creation of our own imagination. The only authority we have to tell you about God comes from what God Himself has revealed in His Word. With that in mind, I'd like to speak about one of the attributes of God, His holiness. Of all of the attributes of God, this is the only one that's being continuously declared around the throne of God. Isaiah 6 says, "I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, lofty and exalted, with the train of his robe filling the temple. Seraphim were standing above him, each having 6 wings. With two, each covered his face, and with two, each covered his feet, and with two, each flew. And one called to another and said, 'Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of armies, and the whole earth is full of his glory.'" This attribute is singled out by being repeated over and over again. The angels are not crying out, "Love, love, love," although God is love. They're not crying out, "Truth, truth, truth," although Jesus could say that I am the way, the truth, and the life. Nor are they crying out, "Wrath, wrath, wrath," even though God is a God of wrath and justice. I think that we can say that more than any other attribute, God is identified by his holiness in heaven. To start, let's start by thinking about this word holy and what it means. Holy is probably most often used as a synonym for moral purity. That's correct, but it isn't the only meaning. It might be better to think about this as the secondary definition of holiness, with the primary meaning being that of separation. The word holy comes from the idea of to cut something in two, so that the two pieces are distinct from each other and separated from each other. That which is holy is that which is other. It's that which is set apart. When the Bible speaks about God's holiness, that's what it's often speaking about the fact that God is higher than anything else that exists. God is elevated from us. He's distinct from us. He's separate from us. He's superior from us. He is a cut above us. He's high and lifted up, as it says in our passage. 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 2 says, "No one is holy like the Lord, for there is none besides you." Another famous Christian, in one of his lectures on the holiness of God, proposed the following thought experiment. He asked us to imagine that we're in charge of the government and have been tasked to come up with 10 new laws by which all other laws would be judged by, a sort of new constitution for the country. If that was your job to pick, what 10 laws would you pick? You might think adding some laws against murdering and against stealing would be reasonable. You might think that laws against coveting or ones where children should honor their parents would be important, but probably less common. But you'd struggle to find anyone that would want to use up one of their 10 laws for a law that says you should keep God's name holy. But that's one of the 10 commandments. In fact, it's the third commandment of the 10 commandments. Exodus 20, verse 7 says, "You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain." I think this shows how seriously God takes blasphemy and misusing the name of God. The word holy is also applied to other things in the Bible beside God. We hear about holy ground, holy vessels, holy Sabbath, holy nation, holy men, and the list goes on. A metaphor that you can think about to compare holiness to is the sun. If you imagine the sun as holy itself, you can imagine the area describing the sun as also being holy. That is, when you get closer to it, you feel the intensity of the power. The very power that gives us life in the sun is also dangerous. If you got too close to the sun, it would annihilate you. It's the same way with the paradox of God's holiness. If you're impure, his presence is dangerous. Not because it's bad, but because it's so good. People throughout history, from different places, types, and cultures, have all had the idea of something being set apart. We even get that in our word for holiday, which comes from holy day, a special day that was set apart for doing something different than the usual things you would do on a day-to-day basis. A good example of the holiness of God can be seen in the story of Moses in the burning bush. God says, "Do not draw near to this place. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place where you stand is holy ground." Moses takes off his sandals, not because there's anything special about the ground itself, but because it became special because God was there. Let's come back to our chapter we were reading in Isaiah and start again from verse 1. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple. The Lord is sitting on his throne. He's actively presiding over history. He is the one who puts kings in place and removes kings. He's the one who removed this king, King Uzziah, and he's the one who would put another king in his place. In those days, a king was measured in part by the size of his train. The greater the king, the longer the train. God's train fills the temple. There's no room for any rival or competitor. Then we come to the idea of the seraphim. The word seraphim literally means burning ones. These are angels that are burning in their passion for God. They're the ones who are closest to God and the ones who are most on fire for him. It's impossible to be in the presence of God and to be unaffected by his glory. Continuing reading, it says, above it stood seraphim. Each one had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. They cover their faces because they're not worthy to look upon God. They cover their feet because they're not worthy to be in the presence of their master. And with 2 they fly. They're ready to be at the service of God whenever he needs anything. And one cried to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the posts of the door were shaken by the voice of him who cried out, and the house was filled with smoke. So I said, Woe is me, for I am undone, because I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Then one of the seraphim flew to me, having in his hand a live coal, which he had taken with the tongs from the altar. And he touched my mouth with it and said, Behold, this has touched your lips. Your iniquity is taken away, and your sin purged. Isaiah is immediately made aware of his uncleanness, and he knows it's not right for him to be in God's presence while he's in his sinful state. Then something unusual happens. A seraph flies over and sears his mouth with a hot coal. This is unusual because the normal idea would have been that something impure would have transferred its uncleanness to the clean thing. But this idea of something clean transferring its cleanness to something unclean was new. Isaiah was not destroyed by God's holiness, rather he was transformed by it. The idea of transformation of that which is unholy by that which is holy is most clearly fulfilled in the New Testament by the life and ministry of Jesus. Throughout his years of ministry, Jesus went around touching people that were impure, people with skin diseases, a woman with chronic bleeding, and even dead people. But instead of their uncleanness passing to Jesus, his purity transfers to these people and heals their body. Jesus is like the holy coal in Isaiah's vision. Now, I want to briefly touch on the secondary meaning of God's holiness. That is his moral perfection. God is sinless, without moral blemish. All of his decisions and judgments are perfect. Everything about our great God is perfect. Therefore, he can take no pleasure in unrighteousness. Psalm 5, verse 4 says, For you are not a God who takes pleasure in wickedness, nor shall evil dwell with you. The boastful shall not stand in your sight. You hate all workers of iniquity. You shall destroy those who speak falsehood. The Lord abhors the bloodthirsty and deceitful man. God cannot be neutral towards sin, and that's the problem for us, because we're all sinners. We've all done things that are bad and fallen short of God's perfect standard. There's a common misconception that people have that when they die, they'll stand before God, and God will look at them and see that they've generally done more good things than bad things in their life, and be happy with that. That might be a nice idea, but as soon as you start to think about it, you see that it breaks down. If a judge on earth decided to let someone off from a crime because they've been otherwise good, that wouldn't be fair. That wouldn't be justice. If we would hold an earthly judge to that level, how much more must we hold the heavenly judge to that level? Thankfully, though, God is also a God of love. So loving, in fact, he's offered us a way of forgiveness. Perhaps the most well-known in the verse in the Bible, John chapter 3, verse 16 says, For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him will not perish, but will have eternal life. Jesus came to this earth to offer us forgiveness. In his life, he lived perfectly and fulfilled the perfect standards required by God. On the cross, he took the place of sinners and paid the penalty that I owed for my sins, and he can do the same for you. Through Jesus, God is able to be both holy and loving. Holy in that there is still a penalty being paid, and loving in that Jesus can be the one to pay it for you. We urge you today to put your faith and trust in Jesus and come into a relationship with the true, holy, and loving God of the Bible. Thank you.